They built a hotel on my land while I was away, not just a cabin or a shed, but a full 3-story hotel that towered over the shoreline like a stranger's fortress. And they didn't stop there. They bulldozed the sacred ground where my wife's ashes were buried. The pine tree we had chosen together as her resting place, now reduced to a raw stump buried under concrete. That land wasn't just property, it was memory. It was family. It was the last piece of Maggie I had left. The HOA president handed me a trespassing notice for my own home and smirked while she said, "You should have answered your mail." At that moment, I understood this wasn't a mistake. It was a theft dressed up as legality. They thought I was finished, but they didn't know about the one legal time bomb buried in Maggie's old papers. A secret that would make me the rightful owner not just of my land, but of the hotel they had so proudly built. The drive home had been something I looked forward to. 6 months away had felt like forever, and I thought the turnoff from the main highway would greet me with the same quiet woods I knew by heart. But a few miles down the county road, something was different. The trees looked thinner, the road had been widened and freshly paved, the kind of work that screamed new money. My heart tightened in my chest as I searched for the split-rail fence my grandfather had built to mark the beginning of my 20 acres. It wasn't there. Instead, a sharp white vinyl fence ran across the property line like a plastic grin. Then I saw the banner, bold letters stretched across it. "The Preserve at Jensen Lake, an exclusive HOA community." Jensen Lake, my grandfather's name. The name on my deed. My pulse hammered in my ears as I turned down the road that should have been my driveway. The gravel road I remembered was gone, replaced by a graded service road wide enough for 2 cement trucks. And there they were, 2 cement trucks idling like mechanical beasts in front of something I couldn't process at first. Where my workshop and tall pines had stood, a massive skeleton of beams and Tyvek-wrapped walls reached for the sky. Windows were already being fitted, balconies jutted out to face the water, and HOA banners flapped proudly from the half-finished roof. It was a hotel, unmistakable, its foundation pushed nearly to the shore. Nearby, a fancy white sales tent stood with another glossy sign promising, "Now leasing lakefront luxury rentals." I parked the truck hard and stepped out. For a moment I stood still, letting the diesel fumes and sawdust hit me, letting the surreal weight of it all sink in. The ground was scarred with bulldozer tracks. Every detail screamed erasure. My land didn't look like mine anymore. I walked toward a group of workers, my boots crunching on dirt that once felt familiar. One man, about my age, carried drywall sheets, his face lined with fatigue. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice steady though my throat was raw. "What's going on here?" "This is my property." He gave me a quick glance, then back at the building. "This is the new HOA lodge. Phase 1 of the expansion." I shook my head slowly. "You don't understand. This is private land, my land." "Tom Jensen?" His eyes softened, but his words didn't change. "All I know is what the HOA lady told our boss. She said the land was abandoned." County took it back. "We just build where they tell us. Abandoned." That word stabbed me in the chest. I hadn't abandoned anything. I had gone up north to bury my brother-in-law, to help my sister through her grief. I was gone half a year, not half a lifetime. My family had cared for this property for 60 years. It wasn't just dirt, it was legacy. I left the worker and walked to where the northeast marker should have been. My grandfather had sunk 4-foot steel pins into the ground, locked in concrete. Every pin was gone. Bulldozer tracks chewed the earth raw. It wasn't carelessness, it was deliberate erasure. They hadn't just built without asking. They had tried to wipe away proof that I ever belonged here, and then I saw the tree. The biggest pine, the one that stood like a sentinel by the water's edge. The one Maggie and I had chosen as her final place. Gone. Nothing left but a massive stump and a scarred patch of dirt pressed under fresh foundation. Under that tree, beneath the stone marker I carved myself, were Maggie's ashes, now smothered by someone else's concrete dream. My breath left me in a rush. This wasn't just a land grab. This was desecration. I climbed back into the truck, my hands trembling on the wheel, fury burning into a cold knot in my chest. I knew exactly who was behind this. Linda Marks, HOA president. She had been a petty tyrant when it came to lawn heights and mailbox colors. But this was bigger. This was greed wrapped in bureaucracy. I drove straight to her place, a pristine corner lot plastered with HOA signs. Linda opened the door before I could even knock, coffee mug in her hand, that perfect realtor smile painted on her face. "Tom," she said sweetly, "welcome back. We heard you were coming. Isn't the preserve wonderful?" "Linda," I said tightly, "there's a hotel being built on my land." She sipped her coffee slowly, eyes gleaming with false pity. "We tried to reach you. Certified letters, rezoning notices. You didn't respond. The county marked it abandoned. The HOA filed adverse possession. It's all perfectly legal." The way she said it, calm and condescending, like explaining to a child, stole the air from my lungs. "You should have answered your mail," she added, her smile sharpening into triumph. Her words weren't explanation, they were victory. She enjoyed this. She had waited for it. I turned away without speaking. Anger wouldn't win this. Paperwork had stolen my land, and paperwork would be my weapon. At the county records office, a young clerk pulled my file, thick and stuffed with recent papers. I opened it and my stomach turned. 4 months' worth of filings, zoning variances, plat adjustments, environmental waivers. Every page stamped with Linda's name. And then I saw it. A transfer request dated 2 weeks after I left. Signed by Linda Marks, notarized by her cousin, Carol Marks. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate conspiracy. But Linda had miscalculated. She assumed I was just a grieving widower too broken to fight. She had no idea what she had awakened. The next morning, the war escalated. A sheriff's SUV pulled into my driveway. A young deputy stepped out, cautious, hand resting near his belt. "Mr. Jensen?" he asked. I nodded. "There's been a complaint. HOA says you're trespassing on community commons property." I felt a laugh push up, bitter and sharp. "This is my land. My deed is in that house." He unfolded a paper, a photocopied map with crude dotted lines, redrawing my land into the HOA boundary. My name was gone, replaced with some LLC I'd never heard of. According to county records, this parcel is Preserve Phase 1, active permits under the LLC. He avoided my eyes as he handed me the paper. "If I have to come back, I'll have to cite you." The law, blind and bureaucratic, was momentarily theirs. In my own home, I was labeled a trespasser. That afternoon, an email blast went out to every neighbor, forwarded to me by an anonymous number with the note, "Thought you should see this." It was Linda's masterpiece of corporate poison. She painted me as an absentee who abandoned the land, claimed the HOA had stepped in selflessly to protect property values, called me a selfish disruption to progress. "We appreciate your patience as we continue to build a better, more prosperous community," she wrote. Neighbors started driving by, some staring, some shaking their heads. A few waved but hesitated. She had turned me into an outsider on my own land. As dusk settled, a beat-up van pulled into my driveway. Rick Dalton, plumber, quiet man from down the road. He stepped out, voice low. "Tom saw the sheriff here." "You okay?" I told him what had happened. He shook his head, disgust in his eyes. "She told everyone at the meeting you sold the land. Said the hotel was part of the deal. People believed her." His words landed like punches. "She hadn't just lied on paper, she had stood in front of a room and erased my life with a story." "This ain't right, Tom," Rick muttered, looking at the half-built lodge in the distance. He didn't offer petitions or promises, just those words. And in that moment, they felt like light in the darkness. That night, restless, I walked the old property lines. My boots carried me to the shed that somehow still stood. Inside, under layers of dust and Maggie's gardening tools, I found a metal deed box. Inside were old papers, survey maps, and then a leather-bound portfolio labeled Jensen Family Land Trust. I froze. 5 years earlier, after a health scare, Maggie had insisted we set up the trust to protect the land. Every acre had been moved out of my personal ownership into the trust, with me as trustee. Linda's filings meant nothing. They had targeted Tom Jensen, the individual, but Tom Jensen didn't own the land. The trust did. Their empire of lies was built on sand. They had bulldozed a hotel onto land they didn't even legally control. For the first time since coming home, I smiled. Linda thought she was checkmating a pawn. She didn't know she was staring down a castle. I closed the box, pulled out my old phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Dale," I said, "it's Tom. I need a surveyor." His gravel voice replied with one word. "Where?" "My place, midnight. They've ripped out the pins." A pause, then a dry chuckle. "Bring coffee." The fight was just beginning. Dale Morrison arrived a little after 1 in the morning, his headlights off as he rolled his old Ford to a quiet stop half a mile down the road. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see the man hadn't changed. Short, barrel-chested, face etched like dried riverbeds, he carried his survey tripod as if it were a rifle. Dale had always been like that. Tools in his hand became weapons against lies. He gave me a curt nod, no small talk, no wasted breath. I laid the old plat maps from my grandfather's deed box across his hood, the ink faded but still legible, and his eyes traced them with a veteran's focus. "They ripped out the markers," I said. Trying to keep my anger steady, he just grunted. "They always do. Thing is, you can bulldoze steel pins, but you can't bulldoze geometry. The math doesn't lie." With that, he grabbed his chains, his level, and motioned for me to move. We worked like ghosts, keeping low through the tree line. The lodge site glared with floodlights, red dots from motion-sensitive cameras sweeping across the ground like eyes. Trucks sat idle in the distance, hulking shadows in the night. Every time a light passed near us, Dale froze like stone until it swung away, then continued with the same calm patience. He measured from the county road, chaining distance after distance, setting temporary stakes almost invisible in the dark. Every 20 paces he stopped, adjusted his transit, checked angles, muttered numbers under his breath. My boots sank into the churned mud, the smell of diesel hanging thick, the silence broken only by the metallic snap of his tape. Near 4 in the morning, the detector screamed. A sharp metallic squeal cut the night, and Dale dropped to his knees in the dirt. He dug with calloused hands until he lifted a rust-red shard of steel from the earth. He brushed it off with a sleeve and handed it to me with a small, satisfied grin. "Southwest corner pin," he said simply. "Your granddad set it deep. They tried to bury it, but they didn't get it all." My chest tightened as I held it. It felt heavier than steel. It felt like proof that Maggie's father and mine hadn't built this place in vain. From that one pin, everything else came alive. Dale worked faster now, each measurement tightening the noose around Linda's lie. He connected points, drove fresh stakes, tied fluorescent ribbons that glowed faint pink in the dawn. When the last line was strung, I stood back and followed it with my eyes. The ribbon didn't clip the lodge, it cut straight through the heart of it. The main lobby, the glass balconies, the grand entrance all sat deep inside my boundary. At least 80% of that building stood on trust land. "They didn't just fudge the line," Dale muttered, spitting in the dirt. "They invented a new map. Fraud. This won't hold up in any court." The first rays of sunrise spilled across the lake, shimmering on the survey tape like fire. For the first time since coming home, I felt the taste of victory. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for a moment I felt Maggie beside me. Proof mattered. Before Dale left, he handed me a bundle of wooden stakes. "When you're ready, pound these in. Official or not, they'll hold up under testimony. They're real. Remember, don't let them rush you. The truth moves slow, but it always wins." I nodded, words caught in my throat. Later that day, as I sat on my porch, staring at the silent stakes in the dirt, a beat-up van pulled up. Rick Dalton climbed out, wiping grease from his hands on his jeans. He carried a greasy bag of burgers and a pair of Cokes. Without a word, he handed me one and sat beside me. "Been hearing things," he said after a long silence. "At the meeting, Linda told everyone you'd sold out. Said this was part of a developer's plan. Half the folks believed her." His jaw tightened. "But I didn't. Didn't sound like you." I told him about Dale's survey, about the trust Maggie had set up, about the stolen boundaries. Rick shook his head, disgust carved deep into his features. "This ain't right, Tom. She's poisoning the whole town with lies." He leaned closer, his voice low. "I know someone. Nina Torres, city inspector, not county. She's seen Linda's tricks before. Hates HOAs. If anyone knows this project stinks, it's her." An hour later, Rick had made the call, and I was driving 2 towns over to meet Nina in the back corner of a grocery store lot. She arrived in a dented Corolla, scanning her mirrors before she even parked. She didn't shake hands, just spoke fast, nerves sharp in her voice. "Show me what you've got." I handed her photos of Dale's survey ribbon cutting through the lodge and the notarized trust documents. She read them in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. Then she looked up, her eyes hard. "The variance," she said in a whisper. That's how she did it. Linda filed a minor variance for a community shed. Nothing more. Then she leveraged it into a permit for a full commercial lodge. There was never a hearing, never an impact review. That building never had a legal foundation. It's fraud, plain and simple. She scribbled a number on a napkin and shoved it into my hand. That's the variance file. Compare it to the permit. They don't match. They never could. Before I could thank her, she was gone, taillights fading into the traffic. The more I stayed quiet, the more Linda panicked. Within days, a new security officer circled the site, a wannabe cop in mirrored sunglasses and a shiny badge that meant nothing. Don Avery, loud, puff-chested, glaring at my windows every time he passed. It was intimidation, nothing more. Then the courier came. A thick cream-colored envelope dropped on my porch, heavy with arrogance. Inside was a cease and desist order from some law firm accusing me of harassment, threatening lawsuits and financial ruin if I dared step foot near the site again. I read every word, and then for the first time in weeks I smiled, because Linda had just handed me the stage. The next morning, instead of crawling into a lawyer's office, I walked to the courthouse. Not to argue, not to beg, I went to the quiet third-floor trusts and estates. With Maggie's notarized portfolio in hand, I filed a simple confirmation of trustee authority. A single piece of paper, $75 in fees, and suddenly the county officially recognized me as trustee of the Jensen Family Land Trust. It wasn't just my land anymore. It was the trust's, protected by law. Armed with that, I walked into the city records department. Calmly, I asked for the active permit for Jensen Lake. The clerk handed it over, listing the fake LLC as owner. I set my papers on the counter and spoke steady. That's incorrect. The legal owner is the Jensen Family Land Trust. I am trustee. On behalf of the trust, I'm pulling this permit. Confusion rippled across the counter. The clerk called a supervisor. For 10 minutes, they whispered, compared signatures, tapped keyboards. Finally, the supervisor returned, nodded, and the clerk picked up a red stamp. With one heavy press, the word suspended bled across the page. The sound of that stamp was sweeter than any gavel. The next morning, silence fell across Jensen Lake. No generators rumbling at dawn. No backup beepers echoing through the woods. No shouts of workers. One by one, trucks pulled in, idled, then turned away. The foreman paced, yelling into his phone, powerless. The site had gone from chaos to ghost town in a single day. Linda reacted fast. She didn't call me. She called her audience. An urgent email blasted every inbox in the HOA. An unstable individual is spreading falsified documents to derail our community progress. Emergency meeting tonight at the clubhouse. We will live stream to set the record straight. She was setting up the cameras herself, building her own stage. What she didn't know was that I already had my witness waiting in the wings. Nina Torres, the inspector, had agreed to attend. And when Nina spoke, the truth would be louder than any of Linda's lies. The clubhouse was already overflowing when I arrived that evening. Cars lined the street, headlights cutting across manicured lawns, people walking quickly toward the doors as if drawn by the promise of a spectacle. Linda had sent out the urgent email less than 12 hours earlier, and the words emergency and live stream had worked their magic. Every folding chair was taken. Neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, and a second row of residents lined the walls. At the front, a laptop sat on a tripod, its green light glowing. The HOA Facebook page was already broadcasting live. The air was thick with the smell of coffee in styrofoam cups and the low hum of whispered conversations. I stayed near the back, unnoticed for the moment, watching Linda at the head table. She was radiant in her red blazer, her blonde bob stiff with hairspray, her smile stretched too wide. Two board members flanked her, their nervous eyes darting between the crowd and the live camera. And by the door, arms crossed and chest puffed out, stood Don Avery in his faux security uniform, as if this suburban meeting were a battlefield. Linda tapped the microphone, and the room hushed. She leaned forward, her voice syrupy, trained from years of realtor pitches. "Friends, neighbors, community members," she began, hands folded neatly on the papers in front of her. "We have gathered tonight because an individual, someone who has long abandoned his property, has chosen to spread lies that threaten our community's progress." Her words flowed smoothly, rehearsed and sharp. She painted me as absentee, careless, selfish. She described the Preserve Lodge as a project of vision and pride, something that would raise everyone's property values and create prosperity for decades. She waved a set of documents above her head. "We have every permit, every zoning approval, every right to build. Don't be fooled by fabrications." The audience nodded, some murmuring in agreement. On the live stream, I could see phones held high, comments already scrolling across the projection screen in the back. "Go, Linda! Don't let him bully us, protect the preserve." I let her build to the peak of her performance. Then, when she paused for effect, I began walking down the center aisle. My boots echoed against the tile floor, each step pulling eyes toward me. Conversations faltered. The murmurs grew louder. Linda's smile froze, then quickly snapped back into place, sharper this time, her eyes gleaming like a predator spotting prey. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "you are not welcome here. This is a community meeting for homeowners who actually care." I didn't look at her. I kept walking until I reached the side of the room where Nina Torres stood quietly, clipboard in hand. She looked every bit the Inspector dark blazer, hair tied back, calm expression that gave nothing away. I handed her a folder containing the suspended permit stamped in red ink and the trustee confirmation. "Inspector," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to carry into the microphone, "would you care to clarify who this property belongs to?" The room shifted like a wave rolling across a lake. People leaned forward, whispers crackled, phones lifted higher. Linda reached out as if to snatch the papers, but Nina stepped away from her grasp. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking sharply, and faced the crowd with calm authority. Her voice was even, professional, the kind of tone that carries more power than shouting. "I am here tonight in an official capacity. The city of Fairwater has suspended the building permit for the Preserve Lodge pending investigation into ownership discrepancies." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Nina held up the stamped permit for all to see. The red ink was bold, undeniable. "Based on the documentation provided," she continued, "the land belongs to the Jensen Family Land Trust. Mr. Jensen is the trustee. The current permit issued under an LLC is invalid until further notice." The murmurs exploded. Some residents gasped, others whispered fiercely to their neighbors. On the live stream screen at the back, the comment feed shifted. New lines appeared. "Wait, is that true? Suspended? She said it was all approved." Linda lunged for the microphone, her composure slipping like a mask cracking. "This is nonsense," she shrieked. "Clerical error. Our lawyers are resolving it as we speak. This changes nothing." But her voice was too shrill, too desperate. The spell she had woven over her audience was unraveling. She turned on me suddenly, pointing a trembling finger. "You!" she spat. "You're costing this community millions. You're destroying our future. We will sue you for every dime you have until you're ruined." I stood still, silent. My calmness only amplified her fury. The crowd saw it. The live stream saw it. The woman who once played queen of the cul-de-sac was unraveling in front of her own people. One of the board members leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but Linda shoved him back, gripping the microphone with white knuckles. "Don't believe this fraud," she screamed. "He's making fools of you. He abandoned this land and now he's trying to steal it back." But the faces in the crowd had changed. Doubt flickered in their eyes. Phones were angled not just at me, but at her, the woman unraveling under her own spotlight. I didn't need to say another word. I nodded once at Nina, then turned and walked slowly back up the aisle. Behind me, Linda's voice cracked, shrieking into the microphone, a desperate echo bouncing off walls that no longer believed her. Outside, the cool night air felt like release. Behind the closed doors, her empire had begun to collapse. For the next week, silence gripped the construction site. The usual roar of machinery at dawn was gone. Workers didn't return. Trucks sat idle in the dirt. The half-built lodge stood frozen, skeletal beams stretching into a gray sky like the bones of a giant. The silence was louder than any speech. It was the sound of defeat creeping in. But Linda wasn't finished. Pride never surrenders quietly. Glossy invitations appeared in mailboxes printed on thick cardstock with gold lettering, the Preserve at Jensen Lake, exclusive investor gala. She promised champagne, catered hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet, and a first look at the future luxury suites. It was theater, an illusion of unstoppable progress. She was trying to overwrite the memory of her public humiliation with another spectacle. Neighbors whispered. Some mocked the idea. Others still clung to hope that their investment would be saved. Reporters RSVP'd, sensing a story too messy to miss. And Linda, ever the showman, doubled down, pouring everything into this performance. I watched quietly. Because while she staged her gala, I had staged something far more powerful. I had traced the money behind the lodge. HOAs don't have millions lying in their coffers. They borrow. And Linda had borrowed big from a small private lending firm in the city. Through an old Army buddy who now worked in banking, I learned that one of the firm's partners was looking to retire, to sell his stake quietly. It was almost poetic. Years ago, Maggie and I had sold a mountain hunting property we never used. She had pushed me to invest the money conservatively. For a rainy day, she said. Well, it was pouring now. I used that money to buy the partner's entire stake in the lending firm. In one quiet transaction, I became part owner of the very debt holding Linda's project together. She strutted in red blazers and glossy pamphlets. But in truth, I was her banker. Her leash was already in my hand. The night of the gala came with clear skies, the lake glistening under string lights stretched across the construction mud. A massive white tent had been erected in front of the half-finished lodge, its edges sinking into the dirt, but inside it sparkled with forced glamour. Round tables draped in white cloth, silver trays of cheese and fruit, champagne glasses lined in neat rows. A string quartet played bravely in one corner, their notes fighting against the smell of wet cement. Linda was in her element again, radiant in a scarlet power suit, her laughter high and brittle as she drifted from group to group, spinning tales of vision and long-term growth. Reporters circled. Neighbors snapped photos, and the air buzzed with nervous excitement. I didn't wear a suit. I wore clean jeans and my old work jacket. I walked straight into the tent, past gawking neighbors and wide-eyed reporters. Don Avery moved to block me, chest puffed, his voice low. "Sir, this is a private—" I looked past him, straight at Linda. She froze mid-laugh, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. The smile slid from her face as I stepped up to the podium, laying a folded document across it. The quartet faltered. Conversations cut off. Phones rose in unison. Linda unfolded the paper, her face twisting. "What is this?" "An eviction notice," I said evenly. "For this tent. And for that building behind it," gasps rippled. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. "You're insane!" Linda snapped, laughing too loudly, waving the paper. "You have no authority here!" I pulled another document from my jacket, holding it high for all to see. "The land belongs to the Jensen Family Land Trust. I am trustee. The permit has been suspended. Everything you are standing in is illegal." Her face blanched, but she tried again, shrieking, "He's lying! He's a fraud!" That's when I pulled the third paper, the one with my signature on the lender's ownership transfer. I laid it gently in front of her. "You're right, Linda, suing me would be complicated. Because I don't just own the land, I own your debt. When your first payment fails, and it will, I foreclose. And when that happens, everything you built becomes mine." The tent went silent. The string quartet had stopped playing. Reporters leaned forward. Neighbors whispered in shock. And Linda, queen of her imagined empire, stood trembling, her face drained of every ounce of power. Her hand twitched, and in one last, desperate act, she hurled her champagne glass, not at me, but at her own vice president. The glass shattered across his chest, spraying cheap liquor down his suit. He shouted, stumbling back. Gasps filled the tent. The HOA queen had lost control, on camera, in front of her court, and I didn't need to say another word. The morning after Linda's disastrous gala felt strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, no workers showed up. No hammering, no trucks backing into the site, no cement mixers humming. Just the sound of birds over the lake, the soft lap of water against the shore. I sat on my porch with black coffee in my hand, watching the sun rise over the half-built skeleton of the lodge. It looked less like a dream of luxury and more like a carcass, silent, half-finished, rotting under its own arrogance. But silence is never permanent when pride still burns. By noon, an email hit every neighbor's inbox again, from HOA President Linda Marks. The subject line screamed, "Community under attack, we will fight back." Her words poured venom. She claimed I had falsified documents, manipulated city officials, and staged a fraud. She called me unstable, dangerous, and obsessed. The board, she said, had new evidence, proving the land trust was fake. Some neighbors believed her. They always would. Their cars slowed when they passed my driveway, faces pressed to glass as if staring at an exhibit in a zoo. But others avoided eye contact altogether, ashamed of the circus. A few quietly gave me small nods or raised hands in greeting. Divisions had cracked wide open. That evening, Rick pulled into my driveway in his dented work van. He didn't bother with a hello, just killed the engine, walked up and dropped onto the porch chair beside me. "She's spinning harder than a busted fan," he muttered, shaking his head. I told him about the gala, the eviction notice, the lender documents. His eyebrows shot up. "So you're telling me you don't just own the land. You own the loan too?" I nodded. He let out a low whistle. "That's not a knife in her back. That's a nuke under her chair." We sat in silence for a moment, the lake shimmering orange in the fading sun. Then Rick leaned closer. "She's not done, Tom. She's cornered. People like her cornered animals, they bite. Hard." He was right. And I felt it in my gut, too. 2 nights later, his warning became reality. It was past 2 a.m. when I woke to a faint scraping sound. At first, I thought it was raccoons in the shed, but the sound was sharper, metallic. I moved to the window and saw a figure at the workshop, dark clothes, hood pulled up, crowbar in hand. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. The beam of a flashlight flicked inside the shed. Whoever it was, they weren't looking for tools. They were rifling through boxes, dragging things onto the floor. My stomach dropped when I realized what was in there, the old deed box, Maggie's papers, the land trust portfolio. I gripped my phone, ready to call the sheriff. But then I froze. A call now would only end in my word against hers. She'd claimed she was retrieving HOA property, and her cousin still had friends in the county office. It could get messy. Then Rick's words came back to me. Wildlife camera. He had told me about his hobby motion-triggered cameras strapped to trees near the property line. One of them overlooked my shed. If it worked, I didn't need to stop her. I just needed to let her hang herself. So I watched from the dark window, jaw clenched, as Linda Marks, queen of the HOA, the self-styled savior of Jensen Lake, stumbled out of my shed carrying 2 heavy cardboard boxes. She looked around nervously, then vanished into the trees with my property in her arms. The next morning, every neighbor in the HOA got another email blast. This time it wasn't slick or rehearsed. It was frantic, rambling, full of typos. She claimed she had obtained the original property records that proved the land trust was fabricated after the fact. She waved her stolen boxes as if they were holy scripture, twisting whatever papers she'd grabbed into one last desperate weapon. I just sat on my porch and waited for Rick. When he pulled in, I asked one question. "Did your camera get her?" He grinned grimly, pulled a memory card from his shirt pocket, and slid it into his laptop. We watched in silence as the black and white infrared video flickered to life. Clip 1, Linda creeping toward my shed with a crowbar. Clip 2, her flashlight beam dancing across the inside as she rifled through my belongings. Clip 3, her staggering back out, arms full of stolen boxes, sweat glistening on her face. The timestamp burned in the corner of the screen. It was undeniable. "This," Rick muttered, "is checkmate." That afternoon, I called the sheriff's office. My voice didn't shake this time. "I need to report a breaking and entering," I said calmly. and I have video evidence of the suspect. The same young deputy who had once handed me a trespassing notice pulled up 30 minutes later. At first, skepticism flickered across his face. But then I showed him the video. His jaw tightened. He made me play it twice, his pen scratching across his notepad. By the time he left, his tone was clipped. Professional. "Sir," he said, "don't touch anything in the shed. We'll handle it." And handle it they did. The arrest didn't happen quietly. It wasn't hidden in the dead of night. No, this one was theater, and the sheriff knew it. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when 2 cruisers rolled slowly down Linda's street. Kids were just stepping off school buses, neighbors watering lawns, mailboxes being checked. The timing was perfect. The cars stopped directly in front of her pristine house. Engines rumbling, lights flashing, residents poured onto their porches, phones ready. Linda opened her door before they even knocked, irritation sharp on her face. But when she saw the uniforms, her annoyance turned to panic. She argued, her voice shrill enough to carry down the block. Neighbors whispered, filming from every angle. Then came the moment no one expected. The HOA president herself. The woman who had fined people for flower pots and grass length was led down her immaculate flagstone path in handcuffs. The gasp that rippled through the cul-de-sac was almost physical. She tried to shout explanations, claimed it was a mistake, a setup. But the deputies ignored her. They opened the cruiser door, pressed her inside, and drove away as cameras rolled. By dinner time, the video was viral on local news blogs. By midnight, it was on regional TV. The comments sections exploded. Finally, HOA Karen gets what's coming. Imagine building a hotel on someone's ashes. Paperwork beats lies every time. The fallout was instant. Her vice president, the same man she had soaked with champagne, resigned the next morning. Other board members stopped answering calls, their phone numbers mysteriously disconnected. The HOA's carefully polished image cracked into chaos. And then came the whispers, a petition circulating through the neighborhood, signatures piling up, calling for an emergency vote to dissolve the entire board. Rick showed up again on my porch with a stack of papers in hand. "We've got enough names," he said simply. "We're taking it back." The emergency meeting wasn't in a clubhouse this time. It was in my yard, right in the shadow of the silent, half-built lodge. Neighbors gathered, some still cautious, others emboldened. For the first time, there were more voices of anger at the board than fear of them. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Linda Marks, absent and facing felony charges, was officially removed as HOA president. The rest of the board dissolved with her. The empire of fines, threats, and lies had crumbled into dust. But the best moment came not with signatures, not even with the vote. It came later, as neighbors lingered in the yard, sipping coffee from thermoses, voices lighter than they had been in years. For the first time, people laughed without looking over their shoulders, and I realized the land wasn't just mine again. The community was free again. The arrest of Linda Marks didn't end the story. It just opened the door to the final chapter. For weeks after she was led away in cuffs, the HOA's empire lay in stunned silence. No meetings, no fines, no warning letters tucked under windshield wipers. The once feared email blasts that had dictated lawn height and mailbox color were gone. But silence, I knew, is not the same as closure. Within days, the county prosecutor filed charges, breaking and entering, theft of documents, and tampering with property records. Her cousin, the notary clerk who had rubber-stamped her forged filings, quietly resigned, citing health reasons. But word spread fast. State investigators were already combing through the county office, dragging every suspicious plat map and permit out into the light. The corruption Linda thought she had buried in paperwork was now unraveling strand by strand. Neighbors watched the news with wide eyes, seeing their queen unmasked. For years, she had been the face of order, of control, of HOA discipline. Now she was the face of mugshots, court dockets, and whispered gossip at the grocery store. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. When Linda finally appeared in court, she looked nothing like the red blazer warrior I had seen at the gala. She was pale, thinner, her hair pulled back into a limp bun. She avoided eye contact with the crowd, clutching her attorney's arm as if it were a lifeline. The hearing was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. The video of her breaking into my shed, the boxes of stolen documents recovered from her house, the fraudulent filings traced directly back to her cousin's notary stamp. Her lawyer advised a plea deal. She accepted. The judge's sentence was cold. Clinical, probation, 400 hours of community service, restitution for the damage to my shed and workshop, and a permanent restraining order barring her from coming within 500 yards of my property. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared at the floor as the gavel came down. For a woman who had lived her entire life demanding compliance, silence was the only rebellion she had left. But my fight wasn't just against Linda. It was against the paper trail she had littered across county records, each fraudulent filing a landmine waiting to explode. I wanted to end this war not just for myself, but for anyone else who might face the same nightmare. So I went back to the courthouse, not to complain, not to protest, but to finalize. With certified documents in hand, I filed a quiet title action. For those who don't know, a quiet title is the legal equivalent of wiping a chalkboard clean. It permanently extinguishes false claims, fraudulent liens, and fabricated filings. When it's granted, there is no dispute left. The land is yours unequivocally, forever. My case was airtight. I had the notarized Jensen Family Land Trust, Dale Morrison's official survey pegging the true boundary lines, and evidence from Linda's criminal case showing the fraudulent paperwork. The judge didn't deliberate long. With the slam of his gavel, the court declared, "The Jensen Family Land Trust is the sole undisputed owner of the property in question." I watched as the clerk stamped my new deed, officially erasing every phantom claim Linda and her cousin had scribbled into existence. For the first time in months, my land was clean again. No dotted lines drawn in the dark, no forged maps hiding in drawers. Just soil, trees, lake, and truth. But the scars remained. The place where Maggie's pine tree had stood was still raw, a jagged stump surrounded by churned dirt. For weeks I avoided it. Every time I looked, grief rose up like a wave, dragging me back to the day I found the hotel's foundation poured over her resting place. One morning I drove to a local nursery. There, among rows of saplings, I found a young white pine barely taller than me. Its needles were fresh, green, vibrant, life ready to begin again. I planted it in the exact spot where the old tree had been, where Maggie's ashes had once rested. I dug deep, steady, my hands blistered but unshaking. When the tree stood upright, roots packed with new earth, I placed a simple bronze plaque at its base. It read, "Maggie's view always home." No grand speeches, no flowery epitaphs, just the truth, etched into metal and soil. I stood there for a long time, watching the sunrise cast golden light through its branches. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt at peace. Meanwhile, the skeleton of the lodge loomed over the lake, a monument to arrogance and greed. Some neighbors suggested tearing it down, but standing in its shadow one afternoon, I realized destroying it would be too easy. No, it deserved to be reclaimed, reshaped into something worthy, so I called a meeting. Not an HOA meeting, a gathering, right there on my property beneath the silent beams of the half-finished lodge. Neighbors came, hesitant at first, then in greater numbers. Rick stood beside me, arms crossed, his face proud. Dale showed up too, surveying gear still rattling in his truck. Even Nina Torres, the inspector who had risked her career by speaking truth, arrived with a shy smile. I told them my plan. The ground floor of the lodge would become a vocational workshop for veterans returning to civilian life. The upper floors would be converted into temporary housing for their families. It wouldn't be a hotel. It would be a home, for those who needed one most. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Soon, applause rolled across the gathering, genuine and strong. In that moment, the half-built skeleton wasn't a monument to Linda anymore. It was the beginning of something new. The transformation was slow but steady. Dale volunteered to supervise the structural repairs. Rick organized work weekends, where neighbors showed up with tool belts and paint rollers. Veterans from the local Legion Hall arrived in force, their laughter echoing through the unfinished hallways. I'll never forget the sound of hammers echoing alongside jokes, the smell of fresh paint mixing with sawdust, the sight of neighbors eating sandwiches on picnic tables set up under the trees. Even Nina rolled up her sleeves, helping string wiring and pointing out safer code-compliant methods. The building that had once symbolized control, greed, and corruption was being reborn as something else entirely. Solidarity, community, healing. One afternoon, I climbed a ladder to help two younger vets repair a section of roof. Below me, kids played tag in the grass, their parents laughing nearby. The lake shimmered like glass. For the first time in years, this place felt alive. And in that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. They had tried to bury me with paperwork, with lies, with bulldozers. But paperwork cuts both ways. Truth once unearthed is heavier than concrete. They built a hotel on my land. And now that hotel was mine, reborn into something that mattered. Linda faded into the background after her sentencing. The community saw her occasionally, picking up trash by the highway in her neon vest, fulfilling court-ordered service. No one waved. No one looked her in the eye. She had gone from feared tyrant to cautionary tale. The county council, stung by the scandal, passed new ordinances closing the very loopholes she had exploited. Never again could an HOA annex land without notarized owner consent. Never again could zoning variances slip through without full hearings. In the end, Linda didn't just lose her empire. She ensured no one could build one like it again. The lodge finally opened a year later. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no champagne glasses. Just neighbors, veterans, and families stepping inside together, sharing coffee and stories. I stood at the entrance. The new sign above the door reading, Jensen Lake Community Lodge. My name wasn't carved into it. Maggie's wasn't either. But her spirit was everywhere, by the new pine tree, in the plaque at its base, in the laughter echoing through halls that had once been silent. I placed my hand against the wood of the door frame, breathing in the scent of sawdust and fresh paint. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could bulldoze the past. But what they built on lies, I rebuilt with truth, and truth like roots buried deep always wins. So if you're watching this, let me ask you something. What would you do if an HOA tried to steal your land, your memories, your very home? Would you give up? Or would you fight back paper for paper, nail for nail, until the truth stood taller than their lies? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit subscribe because this isn't just my story. It's a reminder, paperwork beats lies every time.